My name is Eleanor Beverly, and I was 32 the year I learned the true price of a Virginia pedigree. In dentistry, you learn very early that a flawless white veneer often hides the deepest decay. You do not treat the surface, you treat the root. I live in the Old Dominion, where family lineage and land ownership are the foundation of breathing. My family is old money, or at least they spend like they are. My mother Victoria considers my profession blue-collar labor in a white coat. She prefers the charity galas and the equestrian club luncheons. I prefer the quiet satisfaction of a high six-figure salary that I earned with my own hands. The only thing keeping me tied to my family legacy was 400 acres of prime rolling pasture in Loudoun County. My grandfather William left that land solely to me when he passed. He skipped his own children because he recognized the financial rot eating through their curated lives. He handed me the deed when I graduated dental school. He said land is the only thing that does not lie. The betrayal started on a Tuesday with something as mundane as the mail. Every October for 6 years, I paid the property taxes on those acres. I kept a separate account for it. The envelope from the county always arrived the first week of the month. This year, my mailbox stayed empty. I waited until the second Tuesday. Then I sat at the desk in my sterile office between a crown seating and a root canal, and I called the Loudoun County assessor. The clerk who answered was cheerful. I gave her the parcel number and asked if there was a delay in the mailing. I heard her keyboard clicking. The sound filled the quiet of my office. "There is no delay, Ms. Beverly," she said. "The notices went out on time. They were mailed to the legal owner of record." I told her I was the legal owner. I heard another click. "The records show a transfer 3 months ago," she said, her voice dropping into a careful, professional tone. "The property tax notices are now routed to Victoria Beverly in Alexandria. Victoria is my mother." I stood in my office looking at a tray of polished steel instruments. I listened to a stranger tell me that the woman who raised me had quietly severed my name from the only thing my grandfather left me. I did not panic. I did not demand to speak to a supervisor or scream that a theft had taken place. I thanked the clerk for her time. I hung up the phone. I walked to the sink. I washed my hands with antibacterial soap and dried them slowly on a paper towel. My mother believed my quiet nature and my desire for peace would keep me compliant. She thought she could take the ground out from under me, and I would just swallow it to protect the family name. She did not know what I was about to find in the county records, and she had no idea that her own father had left a trap buried in the paperwork. Welcome back to Still Drama Stories, where ordinary people handle loud betrayals with quiet procedure, and dignity always gets the last word. If you have ever watched someone smile at you while they tried to take what was yours, drop your age in the comments and subscribe. A dentist never extracts a tooth without first looking at the film. You do not touch the surface until you know exactly what is happening in the bone. When I finished my morning schedule, I walked back to my private office and closed the solid oak door. I did not eat lunch. I opened my laptop and navigated to the Loudoun County Property Records portal. Public records are a beautiful thing. They do not care about your pedigree. They do not care which country club your mother belongs to or how much her seasonal wardrobe costs. They only care about paper. I typed in my parcel identification number and waited while the server retrieved the history of the one thing my grandfather trusted me to protect. The screen loaded. The ledger showed a new entry dated exactly 92 days ago. It was listed as a quitclaim deed. For anyone unfamiliar with real estate law, a quitclaim deed is a fast and blunt instrument. It transfers whatever interest you have in a piece of property to someone else without any warranties. It is the kind of paper you use when you want to move an asset quickly and quietly within a family. I clicked the link to view the scanned document. The digital image filled my monitor. There were the standard county stamps, the recording fees, and the legal description of the 400 acres of equestrian pasture that William Beverly had spent his life maintaining. And there, in the center of the page, was the grantee line transferring sole ownership to Victoria Beverly. I scrolled down to the bottom of the second page. I needed to see how she had done it. I needed to see the mechanics of the theft. There it was, my signature. Eleanor Beverly signed in blue ink on the grantor line, signing away millions of dollars of pristine Virginia dirt. It was a very good forgery. I will give my mother credit for her preparation. She has always been a woman who does her homework when she wants something. The slant of the letters was a close match to my own handwriting. The spacing was accurate. To a tired county clerk processing hundreds of pages a day, it would look perfectly legitimate. But a forgery is like a cheap dental crown. It might look fine from across the room, but under a bright light, the margins always betray the lie. I know my own hand. I spend my days working with micromillimeters of precision. When I write, I apply a very specific, heavy pressure to the loops of the letter B in my last name. It is an unconscious habit built from years of gripping fine instruments. The signature on the screen lacked that pressure. The B was smooth and hesitant. The ink dragged in a way that told me the person holding the pen was tracing a shape rather than writing a name. It was the handwriting of a woman holding her breath. I traced the image on the screen with my finger. A cold shock settled over me. It was not the shock of losing the land. It was the shock of the calculation. My mother had not just made a greedy mistake. She had procured a legal document, practiced my signature, and committed a federal offense. A document like this requires verification. I looked to the left of the forged signature to find the notary seal. The stamp was clear. It read, Emily Vance, Notary, Public Commonwealth of Virginia. The name clicked into place immediately. Emily Vance was a young woman barely out of her 20s who worked the reception desk at my father's commercial real estate brokerage in Alexandria. She was soft-spoken, eager to please, and terrified of my mother. Victoria treated the staff at my father's firm as her personal assistants. It took me less than 10 seconds to picture the scene. My mother walking into the reception area, sliding the pre-signed paper across the desk, and telling a naive junior clerk that Eleanor had just signed it at lunch and needed the stamp applied right away. A 20-something receptionist wanting to keep her job does not question the boss's wife. She stamps the paper and enters the date. My mother had weaponized her own social authority to turn a receptionist into an unwitting accomplice to fraud. I sat back in my desk chair and looked at the ceiling of my office. The betrayal was complete, but the betrayal itself was only a symptom. I needed to understand the disease. In Virginia society, the culture of the Old Dominion dictates everything. Status is not determined by what kind of car you drive. It is determined by the land your family holds and the quiet, unbothered way you hold it. You do not sell Loudoun County acreage. You pass it down. You let the horses graze, and you host autumn events on the lawn. Selling inheritance is considered a disgrace. It is a broadcast to the entire society that your family has run out of money. If Victoria Beverly was willing to risk the social humiliation of a sale and the very real threat of a prison sentence for forgery, there was only one logical conclusion. She was hiding a desperate, ruinous debt. I thought about her recent behavior, the way she had complained about the cost of maintaining her lifestyle, the sudden aggressive push from my sister Caroline to enroll her children in even more expensive private academies to keep up appearances, the gala tickets, the designer wardrobes. The facade of the grand matriarch requires a constant flow of cash. My grandfather had known she was reckless. That was the exact reason he had bypassed his own daughter and handed the deed to me. He knew I respected the weight of the dirt more than the shine of the silver. My mother had finally hit the bottom of whatever credit lines she had been running on. She needed a sudden influx of millions of dollars to keep the country club from realizing she was broke. So she had reached into my life and taken the one thing of value I owned. She assumed I would not notice right away, and even if I did notice, she assumed my desire to keep the family peace would override my instinct to protect myself. That is the fatal flaw in people who care only about appearances. They assume everyone else is just as terrified of a scandal as they are. She thought I would swallow the theft to avoid a messy public dispute. She thought I would shrink. I opened the top drawer of my desk and took out a fresh manila folder. I clicked the print icon on my screen. The laser printer in the corner of my office hummed to life and produced 3 crisp, warm pages. I took the printed copy of the forged quitclaim deed and placed it carefully into the folder. I did not feel the urge to call her and scream. Yelling is what people do when they have lost control of the situation. I had not lost control. I had simply gathered the diagnostic imaging required to plan the surgery. When you find a deep infection in a patient, you do not bargain with it. You do not ask the decay to please stop spreading. You prepare the tray, you isolate the area, and you extract the problem by the root. I closed the folder and locked it in my drawer. I checked my reflection in the small mirror by the door. My uniform was clean. My face was calm. I had a Sunday dinner scheduled at my parents' estate in Alexandria in 5 days. I would sit at their polished dining table. I would drink their sweet tea. I would look into the eyes of a woman who believed she had successfully stolen my legacy, and I would let her keep believing it. The most dangerous person in any room is the one who holds the truth and feels no immediate need to speak it. I walked back out to my waiting room to call my next patient. The anesthesia had worn off. The extraction was about to begin. Waiting rooms are psychological constructs designed to soothe and pacify. In my dental clinic, the reception space is curated with muted tones, soft ambient music, and plush seating. The entire environment is engineered to distract the patient from the sharp metal instruments waiting a few doors down the hall. My parents' property in Alexandria functions on the exact same principle. When I pulled my car onto their circular gravel driveway that Sunday afternoon, I observed the immaculate boxwoods and the towering white columns with a new clinical clarity. The estate was a waiting room built to project an illusion of invulnerable generational wealth. I parked my car, took a slow breath, and stepped out into the humid Virginia air. I was walking into a theater where every actor knew their lines except they did not realize the script had changed. My mother met me in the grand foyer. Victoria wore a navy silk blouse and the practiced smile of a woman who hosts charity galas for sport. She stepped forward and embraced me, pressing her cheek to mine. Then she pulled back slightly and adjusted the collar of my dress. Her fingers smoothed the fabric with performative maternal affection. I looked at her hands. Her nails were perfectly manicured, coated in a subtle blush polish. Those were the exact hands that had traced my signature onto a legal document transferring 400 acres of pristine Loudoun County earth into her own name. The duality was chilling. A mother adjusting her daughter's collar while actively executing a felony against her. I did not pull away. I thanked her for hosting and walked past her toward the dining room carrying the secret like a heavy stone in my pocket. The Sunday dinner table was a masterpiece of Southern gentility. Heavy sterling silver caught the light from a tiered crystal chandelier. Tall glasses of sweet tea sweated onto linen coasters. My father Charles sat at the head of the table, pouring wine with the relaxed posture of a man who believed his ledger was balanced. Across from me sat my older sister, Caroline. She is the golden child of the Beverly family. Caroline followed the unwritten rules of our society to the letter. She attended the proper university, joined the correct sorority, and married a man with a recognizable last name. Her husband breeds show horses that rarely place in the money, but the enterprise looks fantastic on a country club application. Caroline spends her life maintaining a facade that requires a continuous torrential flow of cash. As the soup course arrived, she wasted no time dominating the conversation. She sighed loudly, stirring her spoon, and began a rehearsed monologue about the crushing burden of elite private school tuition. She lamented how the academy her 2 boys attended had raised its fees again. Then she looked directly at me. It was a pointed, calculating gaze. She smiled tightly and remarked that some people have it so easy. She said it must be nice to be single and just working all day without the heavy financial responsibilities of raising the next generation of the family. The implication hung over the polished silver. She was suggesting that I ought to subsidize her lifestyle. I took a slow sip of my water and observed her. The layers of irony in the room were staggering. Caroline sat there attempting to guilt me into opening my checkbook, entirely unaware that our mother had already stolen my inheritance to do exactly that. Victoria had forged a quitclaim deed and orchestrated a multi-million-dollar commercial sale to plug the very financial holes Caroline was complaining about. Caroline thought I was simply a selfish spinster hoarding my dental salary. She had no idea her children's tuitions and her husband's failing equestrian business were currently floating on a raft of criminal fraud. I looked from my sister to my mother. The overlapping conflicts hummed in the air. I realized then that Victoria had likely not told Caroline about the forgery. Victoria was playing a solitary game, balancing her golden daughter's demands against the risk of federal prison. As the main course was served, Victoria decided to test the waters. She needed to know if the county clerk had mailed me anything, if I had noticed a disruption in my tax notices, or if I harbored any suspicions about the Loudoun County property. A cautious criminal always returns to the scene of the crime to check for witnesses. Victoria delicately wiped her mouth with a linen napkin and sighed. She mentioned casually how exhausting it was becoming to manage the various unused family assets scattered around the state. She kept her tone light, conversational, and thoroughly innocent, but her eyes locked onto mine. In my profession, when you take a sharp metal explorer and drag it across a questionable spot on a molar, you watch the patient's eyes. You wait for the pupil to dilate or the eyelid to twitch. That tiny involuntary flinch tells you the nerve is exposed and the decay is real. Victoria was dragging a verbal explorer across my boundaries, waiting for me to flinch. She was waiting for me to bring up the missing tax bill or mention the acreage. I met her gaze with a placid professional smile. The kind of smile I give nervous patients when I tell them they will only feel a small pinch. I agreed that managing property must be terribly tedious. Then, without missing a beat, I shifted my posture and leaned forward with genuine enthusiasm. I told her that her teeth were looking a bit dull lately and offered to bring her a box of specialized professional-grade whitening strips from my clinic. I explained the chemical composition of the bleaching agent and how it lifts deep stains from the enamel. I spoke at length about the benefits of a brighter smile. I gave them zero reaction to the bait. I offered them nothing to dissect. My mother blinked, her expression faltering for a fraction of a second. She had laid a trap, and I had responded by critiquing her dental hygiene. Caroline laughed a sharp, dismissive sound, glad to see the attention shifted away from finances and onto our mother's vanity. My father merely continued eating his roast, oblivious to the psychological warfare occurring across his dining table. Victoria forced a polite thank you and quickly steered the conversation toward an upcoming charity gala. Her shoulders relaxed incrementally. She believed she was safe. The rest of the dinner proceeded with suffocating normalcy. We ate dessert. We discussed the humid weather. We played the roles assigned to us by a culture that prizes polite decorum above all else. But the silence I maintained was deliberate and tactical. Silence is the heaviest weight you can put on a guilty conscience. When you refuse to react, you deny the perpetrator the relief of knowing where they stand. Victoria would go to sleep that night, wondering if I was truly oblivious or if I was merely slow to check my mail. The uncertainty would gnaw at her. I folded my napkin, placed it beside my dessert plate, and announced that I needed to return to the city for an early morning procedure. I thanked my parents for the meal, kissed my sister's cheek, and walked out to my car. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I navigated the winding driveway, leaving the grand estate behind me in the dark. The illusion of the Sunday dinner had served its purpose. I had confirmed that my mother was acting alone and that her desperation was tied directly to Caroline's sinking lifestyle. The infection was localized but severe. I merged onto the highway, feeling a cold resolve settle into my bones. The social facade had been maintained, but the diagnostic phase of my operation was officially complete. I knew the motive, and I possessed the evidence. The next step required isolating the vulnerable margins of my mother's scheme. Victoria had not acted in a total vacuum. She had required an accomplice to make the forged document look legitimate to the county recording office. She had used a young, naive employee at my father's brokerage, a girl whose notary stamp was currently acting as the linchpin for a multi-million-dollar felony. My mother thought she could manipulate the lower-level staff without consequence. She underestimated how quickly a junior clerk will panic when a spotlight is aimed at their career. I drove through the night knowing exactly where I would be spending my lunch break the following afternoon. In a dental practice, Monday mornings dictate the rhythm of the entire week. If you begin your day disorganized, the chaos compounds until Friday afternoon. I prefer to start my week with strict control. After treating my first 2 patients, I checked my watch and removed my clinical coat. I had a different kind of appointment to keep across town. My father runs a boutique commercial real estate brokerage in the historic district of Alexandria. The firm specializes in curating high-end properties for clients who care very deeply about zip codes and historical pedigrees. Charles is a man who loves the aesthetics of business far more than the actual labor of it. He enjoys wearing custom-tailored suits and taking clients to lengthy lunches at private clubs. Victoria has always used his office as an extension of her own social empire, ordering the junior staff around as if they were her personal household employees. I stopped at a local bistro and ordered a seared tuna salad. It was my father's favorite lunch, and it provided the perfect innocent cover for my visit. The brokerage occupies a restored colonial building with polished mahogany floors and framed vintage maps of Virginia hanging on the walls. The air inside always smells like expensive floor wax and fresh coffee. When I pushed open the heavy glass door, the reception area was quiet. Sitting behind the wide marble front desk was Emily Vance. Emily was 24 years old and wore clothes she could barely afford on a receptionist's salary. She was trying desperately to blend into the wealthy circles my parents navigated. She had a nervous energy about her, a constant need to please anyone who possessed a higher social standing. That trait made her the perfect target for a woman like my mother. People eager for approval rarely ask questions when an authoritative figure hands them a pen. I approached the desk and set the paper bag on the marble surface. Emily looked up and offered a bright customer service smile. She greeted me enthusiastically and reached for the lunch bag. I told her I was just dropping off a meal for my father between my own appointments. We exchanged pleasantries about the humid weather and the upcoming weekend plans. I kept my voice warm and melodic, mimicking the exact tone my mother uses when she is charming a new donor at a charity fundraiser. Then I let the conversation drop. I allowed a quiet beat to settle over the desk. I tilted my head slightly and looked directly into her eyes. I asked her casually how long she had been handling my mother's personal property transfers. The physiological response of a human being caught in a lie is a fascinating thing to observe. In my clinic, when a patient claims they floss daily, their gums tell a different story. The tissue bleeds on contact. Emily bled immediately. The cheerful customer service smile evaporated. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her face a blotchy, translucent white. Her eyes darted toward the hallway leading to my father's office and then snapped back to me. She opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. She swallowed hard, and her hands began to tremble where they rested on her computer keyboard. She did not ask what I meant. A person who is innocent asks for clarification. A person who is guilty begins to defend themselves. Her voice shook when she finally managed to speak. She stammered out a rushed defense, claiming she only stamped what Mrs. Beverly told her was already approved by the family. She pleaded that she was just following instructions, and that she assumed the paperwork was a routine administrative matter. She was crumbling under the weight of a single casual question. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse her of a crime or threaten her with the authorities. When you want someone to break you, do not give them something to push against. You give them a void. I simply nodded once. I let the silence stretch over the marble desk. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 seconds of pure, unadulterated silence is an eternity for someone battling their own conscience. In those 5 seconds, Emily Vance realized she had placed her own career and freedom on the line for a woman who would not hesitate to throw her aside to save herself. The paranoia took root in her eyes. By remaining silent, I guaranteed she would not run to my mother to warn her. Warning Victoria would require Emily to confess that she had been caught, and a terrified junior clerk will always choose to hide and hope the storm passes over her. I gave her a polite professional smile turned on my heel and walked out the heavy glass doors into the bright Virginia sunlight. The trap was set. Emily would fold the instant a uniform or a badge entered the room. I returned to my car, but I did not drive back to my dental practice right away. I needed to understand the scope of the infection. A forged deed was only the mechanism of the theft. I needed to find the destination of the property. I opened my laptop on the passenger seat and tethered it to my cellular connection. I accessed the State Corporate Commission Registry and cross-referenced the recent filings linked to my father's brokerage. It took me 30 minutes of sifting through newly formed limited liability companies and pending commercial zoning requests in Loudoun County before I found the tumor. There was a preliminary purchase agreement filed under a holding company managed by my father's firm. The property description matched the exact geographic coordinates of my grandfather's equestrian pastures. The buyer was a large commercial developer based out of state, known for paving over historic lands to build sprawling concrete retail parks and strip malls. The purchase price was listed at $8 million. I stared at the glowing screen while the city traffic rushed past my parked car. My mother was not just stealing the land. She was destroying it. William Beverly had spent his entire life preserving those 400 acres from urban sprawl, keeping the soil healthy and the tree lines pristine. Loudoun County is the heart of Virginia horse country. To pave over that kind of acreage for chain restaurants and discount stores is considered a profound betrayal of the local culture. Victoria was selling our heritage to cover her debts. I dug deeper into the escrow details filed in the public zoning request. The target closing date was marked clearly on the final page of the summary. It was set for the summer solstice. That date was exactly 3 weeks away. The timeline made sickening sense. My mother was hosting a lavish summer solstice gala at the local hunt club. She was planning to use the prestige of the event to finalize the sale in a private room, signing away my birthright while drinking champagne bought with the developer's advance money. The clock was officially ticking. The situation had escalated far beyond a simple domestic dispute over a family inheritance. The infection was spreading to third parties. If the commercial developer wired the $8 million into my mother's accounts, recovering the property would become a protracted legal nightmare spanning multiple jurisdictions. The developer would fight to keep the land, and the money would vanish into my sister's tuition bills and my mother's country club fees. I could not just confront Victoria in her kitchen and expect her to surrender. A reprimand would not stop the closing. I needed a structural roadblock that the developer could not ignore. I needed to dig into the foundational documents my grandfather had drafted before his death. I closed my laptop and started the engine. William Beverly was a meticulous man who never trusted his daughter with money. I knew if I looked hard enough into the original trust architecture, I would find the safeguard he left behind. The extraction was going to require specialized tools, and I knew exactly where to find them. In restorative dentistry, you never begin a complex procedure without first reviewing the patient's full medical history. A hidden allergy or an underlying bone deficiency can turn a routine operation into a catastrophic failure. When I arrived at my townhouse on Friday evening, I bypassed the kitchen and carried a heavy fireproof lockbox straight to the center of my living room rug. I needed to examine the history. I needed to find the structural reinforcements my grandfather had left behind. William Beverly was a man who lived by the rule of measuring twice and cutting once. He approached his life and his legacy with the rigid geometry of a master carpenter. I remember watching him repair the perimeter fences at the Loudon estate when I was a child. He would run a plumb line for hundreds of yards, refusing to let a single wooden post sit a fraction of an inch out of alignment. He viewed human character through the exact same lens. He knew early on that his daughter lacked a moral center. Victoria viewed land merely as an oversized checking account waiting to be liquidated for seasonal luxuries. William viewed the earth as a sacred trust that required stewardship. He understood that my mother's greed was a terminal condition. He knew it could not be cured, but he also knew it could be contained if the proper barriers were erected. I sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor surrounded by dense stacks of legal parchment. The paper was thick watermarked and smelled faintly of dust and bound leather. For 3 hours, I read through the original trust formation, the covenants, and the title transfer he had handed me at my dental school graduation. I was looking for the fail-safes he always built into his work. I read the clauses governing mineral rights and the strict restrictions on subdividing the pastures for commercial use. The legal jargon was dense, designed to repel casual readers. Then near midnight, I found the reinforced steel hiding beneath the standard boilerplate language. It was buried deep within a secondary addendum attached to the primary deed transfer. A standard quitclaim form in the state of Virginia requires a grantor, a grantee, and a notary to make a transfer look legitimate to a county clerk. But my grandfather had drafted a restrictive covenant that superseded standard county forms. The addendum explicitly stated that for the first 10 years of my ownership, any transfer sale or financial encumbrance of the property required the signature of a designated independent secondary witness to be legally binding. He had not chosen just anyone to serve in this protective role. He had selected his oldest confidant, Richard Caldwell. Judge Caldwell is a retired Virginia Circuit Court judge. In the Old Dominion, his reputation rivals royalty. He is a man who presides over historical preservation societies and serves on the boards of century-old philanthropic trusts. He views the law not merely as a profession, but as a moral imperative that holds civilized society together. To cross Richard Caldwell is to invite the wrath of the entire traditional Virginia establishment. He is fiercely protective of his friends' legacies and holds a particular disdain for those who try to manipulate the legal system for quick profit. I stared at the paragraph tracing the heavy black ink of my grandfather's initials beside the clause. My mother had missed it entirely. Arrogance creates a very specific kind of myopia. When you are starving for a multi-million-dollar payout, you only see the dotted line where the money is supposed to change hands. Victoria procured the standard county quitclaim form, forged my name, and bullied a receptionist into stamping it. She never bothered to read the foundational covenants governing the estate itself. She assumed she was smarter than the dead man who built her life. She bypassed the exact legal architecture designed specifically to trap her. By failing to secure Judge Caldwell's signature on the transfer document, Victoria had rendered the quitclaim deed voidable. But she had also done something far worse. By filing a fraudulent document that ignored a sitting judge's mandated oversight, she had effectively insulted one of the most powerful men in the state. A claim of forgery requires irrefutable evidence. The burden of proof rests on the victim to demonstrate they could not have signed the document. I stood up from the floor and walked to my home office computer. I pulled up my clinical software and accessed the scheduling logs for the exact date and time stamped on Emily Vance's notary seal. On that specific Tuesday afternoon, I was performing a complex bilateral wisdom tooth extraction. I printed the time-stamped digital radiographs I had taken during the surgery. The images clearly showed my patient in the chair at the precise moment my mother claimed I was signing a deed in Alexandria. I printed the patient sign-in sheet and my own swipe card, entry logs from the clinic security system. The paper trail was undeniable. I had been physically standing over a sedated patient wearing surgical loops and holding a scalpel 30 miles away from my father's brokerage when the deed was supposedly executed. I returned to the living room rug and took out a sheet of heavy cotton stationery. I wrote a formal letter to Judge Caldwell. I did not use emotional language. I did not complain about my mother's cruelty or my sister's entitlement. I laid out the facts with clinical detachment, letting the evidence carry the weight of the accusation. I informed him that an unauthorized transfer of the Loudon property had been filed with the county assessor. I noted that his required secondary signature was absent, making the deed structurally defective. Then I stated clearly that the primary signature was fraudulent and provided the context of the impending commercial sale. I placed the handwritten letter into a thick envelope. Behind it, I stacked the printed copy of the forged quitclaim deed and the forensic proof of my whereabouts on the date in question. I formally requested a private consultation at his earliest convenience, noting the urgency of the upcoming summer solstice deadline. I folded the flap and sealed the envelope, running my thumb along the edge to ensure the adhesive held firm. I placed the sealed package beside my keys on the entryway table. The diagnostic phase was finished. The treatment plan was formalized. The surgical instruments were now laid out cleanly on the stainless steel tray. I turned off the living room lamp, knowing the real pain for my family was about to begin. I parked my car outside a sprawling brick estate in Middleburg on Tuesday evening. Judge Richard Caldwell lived exactly as a retired circuit court jurist should. The architecture of his home was unyielding and symmetrical, featuring perfectly pointed mortar and a heavy slate roof that looked capable of withstanding a siege. I approached the entrance and knocked on the solid brass fixture. A quiet housekeeper let me in and directed me down a long hallway toward the study. Walking into that room was like stepping backward in time. The space smelled deeply of cured pipe tobacco and old leather bindings. It was a scent that commanded immediate respect. Richard sat behind a vast mahogany desk. At 74 years old, he possessed a mind that functioned like a surgical scalpel. He did not waste time with pleasantries or offering me a drink. He gestured toward the leather chair opposite him. My sealed envelope sat open on his green blotter. The forged quitclaim document and my clinical time logs were spread out across the polished wood. "Your grandfather was my closest friend," Richard began. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that had silenced countless courtrooms. William built walls because he knew what kind of predators lived in his own house. The judge picked up the fraudulent transfer document. He adjusted his wire-rimmed reading glasses and traced the forged signature with the tip of a silver fountain pen. He examined the paperwork the exact same way I examine a panoramic radiograph looking for hairline fractures hidden deep within the jawbone. The anger radiating from the man was palpable, but it was not a loud or fiery rage. It was the frigid, calculating fury of someone who had dedicated his entire adult life to upholding the rule of law. To see a legal instrument manipulated so carelessly by a greedy socialite offended him on a molecular level. "Victoria has always been a remarkably foolish woman," he stated plainly, setting the pen down. "But I never took her for a suicidal one." Richard walked me through the anatomy of her crime with clinical precision. He explained that her failure to secure his secondary signature meant the transfer was structurally deficient. A smart lawyer could contest it and have a civil court declare the paperwork void. But the forgery elevated the act from a civil dispute into a severe criminal offense. She crossed a line you cannot walk back from, he explained, while steepling his fingers. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, handling family land poorly is considered a grave social faux pas. Forging a legal document to steal inherited acreage from your own child is a felony that carries mandatory state prison time. We sat in the quiet study and dissected the social ecosystem my mother worshipped. In the elite circles of the Old Dominion, reputation acts as the primary currency. You can be broke, but you must never appear desperate. Victoria was demonstrating profound, reckless desperation. Richard knew the local players intimately. He knew the commercial developer who was scheduled to buy the pastures. He understood the overlapping layers of the disaster we were currently facing. If the developer wired $8 million to Victoria, the ensuing litigation would tie up the Loudon property in probate court for a decade. The land would remain frozen. Caroline's creditors would circle her failing equestrian business like vultures. The carefully maintained family facade would crumble into a chaotic public spectacle. I told Richard I did not want a protracted legal battle. I wanted a clean extraction. I needed the developer stopped before the funds transferred. I also needed Victoria removed from my life with such precision that she could never attempt to retaliate against me. Richard leaned back in his leather chair and regarded me with a look of deep professional approval. "You have your grandfather's temperament," he noted. William never yelled. He simply outmaneuvered his opponents until they had no room left to breathe. Richard proposed a devastating checkmate. He offered to personally draft a formal injunction to halt the pending sale immediately. Alongside the injunction, he would prepare a sworn affidavit of forgery detailing the exact nature of the fraudulent quitclaim document. He would cite his own missing signature as definitive proof of the tampering. The legal paperwork would be ironclad and incontestable, but the delivery method was the true genius of his plan. If we filed the injunction quietly through the standard courthouse channels, Victoria would inevitably find a way to spin the narrative. She would hire a crisis management firm. She would tell her country club friends that it was a simple misunderstanding over tax codes. She would claim I was an ungrateful daughter trying to hoard assets while the family struggled through a temporary cash flow issue. We could not allow her to control the story. If you want to dismantle a narcissist, you must remove their audience. Or better yet, you must turn their audience against them. I informed Richard about the upcoming summer solstice gala at the Loudon County Hunt Club. I told him Victoria was using the prestigious event as a cover to finalize the transaction with the commercial developer in a private lounge. She was blending her social coronation with her grand theft. Richard smiled a thin, predatory smile that did not reach his eyes. If Victoria wants to act like a grand matriarch selling off ancestral estates, we shall treat her like one, he said. We will deliver the consequences in the exact environment she values most. We will do it in front of the society she is trying so desperately to impress. We spent the next hour refining the trap. We outlined the sequence of events with meticulous care. I would attend the gala wearing my grandmother's vintage jewelry. I would let Victoria believe her scheme was working perfectly. I would gather the developer, my parents, and my sister in the VIP room for the final signing. I would present my own forensic evidence. And then Richard would enter the room, a retired circuit court judge walking into a high society event to serve an affidavit of forgery carries a weight that no public relations spin can ever survive. For the remainder of the evening, we worked in silence. Richard dictated the legal terminology, while I provided the specific dates and parcel numbers. The study grew dark outside the tall windows, but the warm light from the brass desk lamp illuminated the blueprint of my mother's ruin. Every word Richard wrote was another nail sealing the coffin on Victoria's reign in Virginia society. The injunction was flawless. The affidavit was merciless. We finished preparing the paperwork just before 10 o'clock. Richard placed the crisp documents into a heavy navy blue binder. He handed the binder to me across the mahogany desk. I took it, feeling the physical weight of the leverage I now held in my hands. I thanked the judge for his unwavering loyalty to my grandfather. He walked me to the front door and told me to stay vigilant. He warned me that desperate people often make reckless moves when a deadline approaches and the pressure begins to build. I drove home through the winding country roads, knowing the closing date was only 10 days away. The plan was set, and the foundation was secure, but I had underestimated how quickly Victoria would try to cover her remaining tracks. The very next afternoon, my phone rang with a lunch invitation that proved the infection was spreading much faster than I anticipated. 10 days remain before the developer expects a clear title at the summer solstice gala. 10 days act as an abrasive force wearing down the sharpest nerves and stripping away the most polished facades. A ticking clock functions like a high-speed drill on a decaying molar, generating heat and friction until the patient can no longer conceal the pain. I knew the pressure building inside my mother was becoming unmanageable. I just needed to wait for her to make a sloppy mistake. The error arrived on a Wednesday morning in the form of a phone call. I was standing in my sterilization room reviewing a chart when my cell phone vibrated. Victoria never calls me during clinical hours. She considers my work an unsavory topic and prefers to pretend I spend my days doing something more refined. Her voice sounded thin over the receiver, stretched tight over a wire of rising panic. She requested a quick lunch at her country club. She framed it as a spontaneous desire to catch up, but her pacing betrayed her true intentions. Desperation has a distinct cadence. I agreed to meet her at noon. Declining the invitation would have signaled that I knew her timeline. I needed her to remain confident in her own deception. The country club is an institution dedicated to the preservation of appearances. It sits on sprawling acreage, surrounded by manicured golf greens and ancient weeping willows. The dining room smells of lemon polish and expensive perfume. The waiters wear starched white shirts and move with practiced silence, remembering the exact drink orders of every member who walks through the heavy mahogany doors. It is an environment where raising your voice is considered a cardinal sin. It is a sanctuary for passive aggression, where reputations are dismantled in whispers over iced tea. Victoria chose this location because she believed the strict rules of Southern etiquette would serve as a straitjacket. She thought the refined setting would force me to comply with whatever she presented. She failed to realize that the same social constraints would also trap her. I handed my keys to the valet and walked into the dining room wearing a tailored charcoal suit. Victoria was already seated at a corner table overlooking the 18th hole. She wore a pristine ivory blouse and her signature string of pearls. From a distance, she looked like the undisputed queen of Loudoun County. Up close, the reality was far less flattering. I sat across from her and studied her face. A seasoned practitioner learns to look past the makeup and observe the underlying tissue. Her jaw muscles were clenched tight enough to grind down her teeth. Her eyes darted toward the entrance every time the heavy wooden doors swung open. The developer was breathing down her neck for a clean title, and her stolen money had not yet materialized. We ordered Waldorf salads and sparkling water. Victoria attempted to engage in trivial gossip about a recent charity auction, but her heart was clearly not in the performance. She stirred her water with a silver spoon, making the ice clink nervously against the glass. Before our plates even arrived, she abandoned the small talk and reached into her designer handbag. She produced a single sheet of paper and slid it across the white linen tablecloth. She placed a gold-plated pen right beside it, aligning it perfectly parallel to the edge of the page. She offered a bright, brittle smile and told me it was just a routine administrative matter. She claimed her accountant was updating the historical records for the Beverly estate and had noticed a few minor discrepancies regarding past property tax payments. She said the document was a simple tax waiver designed to indemnify the estate from any clerical errors. She insisted it was standard procedure, just a bit of retroactive housekeeping to keep the county auditors off our backs. It was a lie wrapped in the boring language of bureaucracy. I did not touch the pen. I looked down at the document. It was a crude legal instrument drafted in a hurry. The clauses were designed to grant Victoria blanket immunity for any recent modifications to my property tax routing and ownership records. It was a retroactive shield meant to protect her from the fallout of her own forgery. If I signed that paper, I would be legally acknowledging her authority over the estate records and effectively waiving my right to pursue damages for the stolen land. It was the equivalent of a dentist placing a temporary filling over an active raging abscess and hoping the patient never noticed the infection underneath. She leaned forward and began her verbal assault. She used a very specific vocabulary to corner me. She said we needed to finalize this for the family. She stressed that the family must always maintain a unified front regarding financial matters. She whispered that this was the best way to protect the family from unnecessary government scrutiny. 3 times in less than 2 minutes, she weaponized that word. Family. She wielded it like a blunt object, hoping to bludgeon my common sense into submission. I looked at the document again. Then I slowly raised my eyes and looked at her hands. The blush polish was chipped on her index finger. It was a tiny imperfection, but an extremely telling one. Victoria Beverly never allowed her grooming to falter unless her internal world was actively collapsing. The stress of the impending commercial sale, the demands of my sister Caroline, and the fear of federal prison were eroding her composure hour by hour. I did not confront her. I did not point out the blatant legal traps buried in the waiver. I did not mention the developer or the quitclaim deed currently resting in a navy blue binder on Judge Caldwell's desk. Confrontation provides a release of tension, and I had no intention of granting her any relief. I picked up the document. I folded it precisely in half and then into quarters, ensuring the creases were sharp and deliberate. I unzipped my leather tote and placed the folded paper inside. I snapped the bag shut. I looked directly into her eyes and kept my voice pitched low and melodic. I will have my accountant review this tonight. You know how meticulous I am. The color vanished from her face, leaving her skin an ashen gray. Her eyes widened, and her breath hitched audibly in her throat, causing her pearl necklace to shift against her collarbone. Her entire plan had hinged on my passive compliance. She expected me to pick up the gold-plated pen and sign the paper between bites of salad, eager to please the matriarch and avoid a public confrontation. By taking the document, I had just introduced an independent financial auditor into her fragile criminal scheme. If a certified public accountant reviewed that waiver, they would immediately demand to see the underlying property deeds to verify the tax routing. The forgery would be exposed before the sun went down. Her veneer shattered. Real, genuine panic flooded her features. Her mouth opened to protest, to demand the paper back, to order me to sign it immediately. But the trap she had set for me snapped shut around her own ankles. We were sitting in the center of the Farmington Country Club. The wives of 2 local judges were dining at the adjacent table. A prominent state senator was drinking coffee by the window. Victoria could not raise her voice. She could not reach across the table and snatch my bag. She could not scream that her life was falling apart. The polite decorum she worshipped now functioned as a velvet gag, preventing her from uttering a single word of protest. I stood up from the table, leaving my untouched salad behind. I smoothed the front of my suit and retrieved my keys. I told her I needed to return to the clinic to prepare for an afternoon surgery. I thanked her for the lunch and wished her a productive afternoon. I walked away, leaving her stranded at the corner table, surrounded by the clinking of fine crystal and the low murmur of wealthy patrons. I did not look back, but I could feel the gravity of her terror radiating across the dining room. She was suffocating in her own rising anxiety, unable to scream, unable to breathe. The false crown she wore was cracking under the pressure of her own design. The clock was still ticking toward the summer solstice, and her retroactive shield was now residing in my tote bag, destined to become the next piece of evidence in her prosecution. As I handed my ticket to the valet, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen displayed a furious text message from Caroline, demanding to know why a vendor at the Equestrian Center had just declined Victoria's primary credit card. The developer had not wired the advance money yet, and the Beverly financial well had officially run dry. The dominoes were beginning to topple. I tipped the valet, slipped into my car, and prepared to dispatch my newly acquired evidence to the forensic examiner. The infection was fighting back, and it was time to isolate the root. In dental surgery, a hunch is a dangerous thing. You cannot open a patient's jaw based on intuition or a vague sense of a problem. You require imaging pathology reports and empirical data that no second opinion can refute. I applied this exact discipline to my mother's impending destruction. I drove away from the country club and immediately made a phone call from my car. I did not contact a family mediator or a counselor. I contacted a private forensic document examiner based in Richmond. This specific firm specialized in corporate fraud and provided expert testimony in high-stakes federal trials. I securely transmitted the digital copy of the forged quitclaim deed alongside 15 verified samples of my actual signature. I requested their most expedited analysis. They promised comprehensive results within 48 hours. While the examiner worked, I needed to secure the next instrument for my surgical tray. The junior notary, Emily Vance, was already fracturing under the weight of the silence I had left her with at the brokerage. I decided to apply a fractional amount of pressure to see if her fragile structure would shatter. I parked in my clinic lot and sent a brief, polite email to Emily's professional address. I wrote that I was updating my personal legal records and requested a copy of her official notary log for the Tuesday the deed was stamped. I hit send and walked into my afternoon shift. By the time I finished a routine crown, lengthening my inbox contained a frantic reply. Emily had unraveled entirely. She typed a sprawling, terrified response, admitting that no log existed for that transaction. She confessed in writing that Victoria Beverly had handed her the document, assured her it was a routine formality authorized by the estate, and pressured her into stamping it without the signatory present. Emily begged me not to contact the State Board of Elections. She pleaded that she was only trying to keep her job. I printed her email. Her confession was now memorialized in crisp black ink. The social dynamic of Virginia elite using their employees as disposable shields had just provided me with a written admission of guilt. 2 days later, a bonded courier delivered a sealed envelope to my clinic. I took it into my private office and broke the seal. The forensic report was a masterclass in clinical devastation. It spanned 12 pages of microscopic analysis detailing stroke velocity, ink drag, and baseline deviations. The examiner concluded with categorical certainty that the signature on the Loudoun County deed was a forgery. The report highlighted the hesitant, deliberate tremors indicative of a tracing effort, rather than a fluid, natural signature. It noted the incorrect pen pressure on the ascending loops. The data was irrefutable. My mother had traced my name with the cautious, unsteady hand of a thief. I went to a local supply store and purchased a heavy navy blue binder. The color felt appropriate. It was the shade of traditional corporate portfolios, a color designed to project unyielding authority. I sat at my desk and began arranging my instruments. I used clear protective sleeves to ensure each piece of evidence remained pristine. In the first sleeve, I placed the certified 12-page forensic report. In the second, I slid the printed copy of the forged quitclaim deed. The third sleeve received Judge Richard Caldwell's sworn affidavit and his drafted legal injunction. The fourth held Emily Vance's panicked email admitting to coercion and notary fraud. Finally, in the fifth sleeve, I filed the unsigned tax waiver my mother had tried to slide across the country club table just days prior. I snapped the heavy metal ring shut. The sound was sharp and final in the quiet office. This binder was not merely a collection of papers, it was the legal equivalent of a lethal injection. It contained every mechanism required to dismantle my mother's freedom, her social standing, and her financial future. I locked the navy blue binder in my bottom drawer. The preparation was complete. I only needed to wait for the patient to sit in the chair. The pressure outside my office was building to a critical threshold. My phone vibrated relentlessly on the desk, illuminating the darkened room. Caroline was sending a barrage of text messages, each one more frantic than the last. My sister lives in a state of perpetual financial anxiety, masking her debts beneath designer labels and equestrian trophies. Her husband's horse breeding business is an expensive illusion that requires constant capital to maintain the appearance of success. Caroline texted that her vendor at the stables had declined Victoria's primary credit card. A few minutes later, another message arrived, complaining that a luxury caterer for her upcoming summer luncheon had demanded a cash deposit because a previous Beverly family check had bounced. Caroline could not comprehend the reality of the situation. She blamed bank errors. She blamed the accountants. She blamed the vendors for their audacity. She lacked the capacity to see that the Beverly financial well had run dry. The tightrope my family was balancing on had begun to fray. Victoria had promised Caroline a substantial infusion of cash, counting on the commercial developer's advance payment to keep the creditors at bay. But commercial land developers do not wire $8 million without a clear, unencumbered title. They conduct their own due diligence, and they protect their investments. The developer was withholding the funds until the final formal sign-off. Victoria was operating on fumes floating her lavish lifestyle, and Caroline's mounting debts on a fragile promise that the Loudoun County acreage would convert to liquid capital by the end of the month. Every declined credit card was a warning siren that the facade was crumbling. The deadline for this elaborate illusion was the summer solstice gala. The Loudoun County Hunt Club hosts this event every year to celebrate the beginning of the season. It is a spectacle of old wealth filled with local politicians, corporate executives, and generational heirs. It is an environment where status is performed and judged by a ruthless jury of peers. Victoria had leveraged the last of her dwindling social credit to be named the guest of honor for the evening. She had invited the commercial developer as her premier guest. Her strategy was transparent and born of pure desperation. She intended to use the prestige of the gala to mesmerize the buyer finalizing the property handover in a private VIP lounge while the rest of Virginia society drank champagne in the ballroom. She believed the glamorous setting, the string quartets, and the expensive gowns would blind the developer to the hastily arranged paperwork. She was banking her entire future on the assumption that a grand party could cover up a felony. I read Caroline's panicked texts one last time before turning off my phone. The infection had reached its terminal stage. My mother had built a stage for her own coronation, entirely unaware that she had also built the perfect venue for her execution. The gala was only days away. I left my clinic and drove home beneath the humid evening sky, knowing exactly what I was going to wear to the hunt club. The Loudoun County Hunt Club stands as a sprawling monument to a very specific breed of generational pride. Its architecture features sweeping wraparound porches, whitewashed brick facades, and towering oak doors that have guarded the secrets of the Virginia elite for over a century. To receive an invitation to the Summer Solstice Gala is a mark of social survival in the Old Dominion. To be named the guest of honor at this gathering is equivalent to receiving a royal crown. Victoria Beverly had orchestrated her own coronation. She intended to use this night to permanently secure her fabricated legacy and wash away the stain of her impending financial ruin. The grand ballroom smelled of roasted venison, aged bourbon, and fresh magnolias. A string quartet positioned near the massive stone fireplace played a complex classical arrangement that hovered just below the volume of polite conversation. Hundreds of wealthy patrons moved across the polished hardwood floors, their vintage jewelry catching the light from the tiered crystal chandeliers overhead. It was a sterile, carefully curated environment. In my profession, maintaining a sterile field is paramount to preventing a fatal contamination during surgery. Victoria viewed this ballroom as her personal sterile field. She believed the elegant setting and the strict rules of high society etiquette would insulate her from the consequences of her impending theft. I arrived just after 8 o'clock. I bypassed the valet stand and parked my own vehicle near the edge of the manicured lawn. For this occasion, I chose not to wear a modern designer label. I wore a vintage emerald green silk gown that had once belonged to my paternal grandmother. The fabric was heavy and cut with a modest, timeless precision. My grandmother was a woman of quiet fortitude, who despised pretense and valued the integrity of the soil above all else. Wearing her garment was a tactical decision. It served as a visual reminder to the older members of the club of the true lineage attached to the Beverly name. It was a silent challenge to my mother's superficial reign over a kingdom she was actively trying to dismantle. Alongside the emerald silk, I carried a structured black leather business tote. In a room where women clutched tiny beaded evening bags, a large corporate tote was a glaring breach of formal etiquette. It was a deliberate disruption. Inside that leather enclosure rested the heavy navy blue binder containing the forensic handwriting analysis, the terrified written confession of the junior notary, and the judicial affidavit drafted by Richard Caldwell. The weight of the evidence pulled steadily at my shoulder, grounding me in reality, while the rest of the room floated on a tide of expensive champagne and willful ignorance. I stood near the arched entryway and observed my family functioning within their natural habitat. My father Charles held a glass of scotch near the mahogany bar. He was recounting a tedious story to a local district attorney, laughing far too loudly to mask the profound financial void echoing in his own bank accounts. A few feet away, my sister Caroline engaged in a frantic conversation with the wives of two prominent equestrian breeders. Caroline held her wine glass with a grip so tight her knuckles were white. Her husband's business was sinking rapidly, and her smile was brittle, stretched thin over a mounting pile of declined credit cards and empty promises. They were all performing. They were actors, waiting for the final act to deliver their salvation. Then I found the center of the infection. Victoria held court near the grand sweeping staircase. She wore a champagne-colored gown adorned with intricate silver beading that caught the chandelier light with every movement. She projected the aura of a triumphant matriarch who had just navigated a perilous storm to secure her family's future. She smiled, she nodded, and she touched the arms of her admirers with practiced grace. but my eyes shifted past her carefully constructed performance to the man standing just outside her immediate circle. He did not fit the refined aesthetic of the Loudoun County Hunt Club. He wore a tailored suit, but his posture was rigid, impatient, and predatory. He held a crystal flute but did not drink from it. He checked the face of his luxury watch every few minutes. This was the commercial land developer. He was the man who specialized in pouring millions of tons of concrete over historic pastures to erect strip malls and chain retail stores. He represented the total destruction of my grandfather's lifelong work. He was the buyer waiting in the wings, holding the multi-million-dollar lifeline that Victoria desperately needed to wire into her checking account before morning broke. The developer caught my mother's eye and tapped the face of his watch. The signal was unambiguous. He was tired of the endless social theater and wanted his clear title to the land. Victoria offered him a placating, reassuring nod and turned toward the center of the room to excuse herself. That was the exact moment her gaze intersected with mine. The transformation was instantaneous. The radiant, triumphant smile froze on her face, locking her features into a rigid mask of terror. The champagne gown seemed to lose its luster as the blood drained entirely from her cheeks. She spotted the vintage emerald silk, instantly recognizing her own mother-in-law's garment. Then her eyes dropped to the oversized black leather tote hanging heavily from my shoulder. She recognized that I was not there to celebrate her triumph. I was there to conduct clinical business. Victoria excused herself from a prominent state senator and moved toward me. She navigated the crowded ballroom with the terrifying speed of a predator cornering its prey. She maintained her broad, welcoming smile for the benefit of the surrounding guests, projecting the image of a delighted mother greeting her successful daughter. But her eyes were dark, flat, and frantic. She reached me near a towering floral arrangement of white lilies. "Eleanor, darling," she sang out, her voice pitched loud enough for nearby patrons to hear. She threw her arms around my shoulders in a theatrical, sweeping embrace. The performance ended the moment our bodies met. Under the guise of a warm maternal hug, her right hand clamped down onto my bicep. Her fingers dug into the muscle with a sudden, vicious force. Her manicured nails pressed through the emerald silk, creating a sharp, localized pain designed to force my immediate compliance. It was a physical manifestation of her crumbling control and escalating panic. In clinical dental practice, when a patient experiences a sudden spike of anxiety in the chair and grabs your wrist, you do not pull away. You remain a solid, immovable object until their panic subsides and they realize they cannot control the environment. I did not flinch. I did not break my upright posture. I allowed her to inflict the pain, observing her desperation with detached professional curiosity. She pulled back slightly, keeping her punishing grip on my arm. She leaned in close, bringing her mouth mere inches from my ear. The scent of her expensive floral perfume failed to mask the sour, metallic odor of her own surging adrenaline. "What are you doing here with that ridiculous bag?" she hissed, her voice vibrating with barely contained rage. "You are ruining the entire aesthetic of the evening." I kept my voice low and melodic, echoing the soothing tones of a waiting room. "I came to finalize our business. Mother, you mentioned a lingering administrative issue at lunch last week, and I wanted to be thorough." Her grip tightened further, attempting to locate a sensitive nerve. She glared at me, her chest heaving slightly under the beaded silk fabric. "You need to step into the VIP lounge with me right now," she commanded through gritted teeth. "The buyer is waiting for us. You are going to sign the final tax paper, and you are going to do it quickly without causing a scene. Our entire family's future depends on your cooperation tonight. Do not humiliate me in front of these people." I looked over her tense shoulder. The commercial developer had abandoned his position near the staircase. He was walking purposefully toward the private velvet-draped doors of the VIP lounge located at the back of the hall. He paused, looking back at us, and offered a curt, expectant nod. He was a man who believed he was purchasing a clean, unencumbered legacy from a unified and respectable dynasty. He had no idea he was walking blindly into a meticulously constructed forensic trap. My mother released her grip, leaving a dull, throbbing ache in my arm. She smoothed the front of my dress, reestablishing the illusion of maternal care for the benefit of the passing waiters carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres. She stared at me, her eyes pleading and threatening all at once. She was begging me to remain the quiet, obedient daughter she had spent 32 years underestimating and dismissing. She was asking me to facilitate her felony so she could maintain her champagne lifestyle for a few more years. I adjusted the strap of my heavy leather tote, feeling the solid, unforgiving weight of the evidence resting securely against my hip. I looked at the developer waiting impatiently by the velvet doors, and then I looked directly into my mother's frantic, calculating eyes. I smiled. It was a smooth, clinical, devastating smile. "Of course, Mother," I said, my voice projecting a serene, unbreakable calm. "Let us go handle the paperwork." The heavy oak doors sealed shut behind me, severing the string quartet music and the polite chatter of the ballroom. The sudden silence inside the private VIP lounge felt exactly like the pressure drop when you step into a sterile operating theater. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady vibration. The room smelled of expensive aged leather and spilled bourbon. It was a space designed for wealthy men to quietly exchange generational wealth away from the prying eyes of the public. I stood near the entryway and surveyed the surgical field. My father, Charles, was standing near a polished brass bar cart pouring himself a glass of scotch. Charles is a man who inherited his real estate brokerage and spent his entire adult life avoiding any genuine exertion. He relies on a curated network of country club associates to keep his business afloat. My sister Caroline was pacing the perimeter of the room, her heels sinking into the thick woven carpet. She was twisting her diamond wedding band around her finger, radiating a frantic, nervous energy. She desperately needed the proceeds of this secret land sale to rescue her failing equestrian breeding facility. Neither my father nor my sister knew the actual mechanics of the transaction. They only knew that Victoria had promised them a financial miracle before midnight. Standing near a velvet-draped window was the commercial developer. He wore a sharp-tailored suit that marked him as a corporate outsider in a room full of old Virginia money. He was a man who specialized in turning sprawling historic pastures into profitable retail centers. He checked his phone, waiting for the confirmation that he could authorize the wire transfer. He viewed familial disputes as an annoying liability, and he expected a seamless transaction. He did not know that the property he was purchasing was tethered to a fraudulent document. Victoria positioned herself at the head of a long mahogany conference table in the center of the lounge. She had dropped the warm maternal facade she wore in the ballroom. The champagne-colored gown suddenly looked like armor. She did not offer me a seat. She did not ask about my evening. She simply pointed to a single sheet of paper resting on the dark wood surface. It was the same retroactive tax indemnity waiver she had tried to force upon me at the country club luncheon. A heavy gold pen sat perfectly parallel to the edge of the page. "Sign the waiver, Eleanor," she instructed. Her voice was flat and devoid of any affection. "Do not make a scene tonight. The family needs this capital to restructure our assets." She was attempting to use the intimidating presence of the developer and the formal setting of the VIP lounge to coerce my compliance. The developer shifted his weight uncomfortably. He recognized the tone of a hostile shakedown. He cleared his throat and stated that his legal department was assured all internal family administrative hurdles were already resolved. He looked at me expecting to see a submissive daughter ready to capitulate under parental authority. I kept my posture rigid and my expression entirely neutral. I walked slowly toward the mahogany table. I did not reach for the gold pen. I lifted my large black leather business tote and placed it directly onto the polished wood. The impact created a dull, heavy thud that commanded the immediate attention of every person in the room. I unzipped the main compartment and extracted the thick navy blue binder. I centered the binder on the table right beside her fraudulent waiver. "I cannot sign a tax waiver for land I apparently sold to your holding company 3 months ago," I said. I kept my voice pitched low, ensuring the resonance carried to every corner of the soundproofed lounge. The sentence fractured the tension in the room. Charles stopped pouring his drink, the heavy crystal decanter hovering in midair. Caroline halted her pacing and stared at me, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. She asked aloud what I was talking about. Victoria froze. The remaining color drained from her face, leaving her skin a translucent gray. She recognized the navy blue binder. She realized that the quiet daughter she had underestimated for 3 decades had been conducting a forensic investigation behind her back. Her chest stopped moving. the breath caught in her lungs. Her fingers, which had been resting confidently on the edge of the mahogany table, curled inward like dying insects. The grand matriarch who had spent the evening securing her legacy was now staring at a physical object that promised to end her life as a free woman. I reached out and flipped the heavy cover of the binder open. The bright overhead lighting caught the clear plastic sleeves, revealing the certified documents inside. I turned to the first section, displaying the 12-page forensic handwriting analysis. I looked directly at my mother while I summarized the findings for the room. I explained the microscopic evaluation of ink drag stroke velocity and baseline deviations. I detailed how the signature on the quitclaim deed lacked my specific anatomical pressure points. "You forged my signature, Mother," I stated, maintaining a steady clinical gaze. "You committed a felony to sell Grandpa's land to a strip mall developer." In a dental operatory, when you finally expose the rotting root, you do not feel pity for the infection. You feel the deep satisfaction of a correct diagnosis. Standing in that VIP lounge watching my family comprehend the magnitude of the crime, I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. For 32 years, I had been the silent observer, the blue-collar worker they tolerated at holiday dinners. They assumed my silence was born of intellectual inferiority. They failed to realize that silence is the optimal condition for gathering empirical data. I had charted every lie, measured every manipulation, and documented every vulnerability. The accusation hung in the sterile air. Caroline let out a short, panicked gasp. The reality of her mother's actions shattered the illusion of their impending financial rescue. Her equestrian estate was not going to be saved by a clever business maneuver. It was tethered to a criminal conspiracy. Charles slowly set the Scotch decanter down onto the silver tray, his hands trembling visibly. He held an active real estate broker's license in the Commonwealth of Virginia. He understood the severe legal ramifications of a forged property deed originating from his own family. He stared at his wife as if a stranger had just unzipped her skin and stepped out into the room. The commercial developer reacted with the swift self-preservation of a seasoned corporate entity. He was a man who navigated zoning boards and environmental impact studies with ruthless efficiency. But he knew that participating in a transaction involving a forged familial deed would invite a relentless investigation by the state attorney general. The risk profile of the Loudoun County pastures had just shifted from a lucrative retail opportunity to a toxic legal hazard. He took a wide physical step backward, putting deliberate distance between himself and the mahogany conference table. He raised both of his hands in a defensive posture, signaling his immediate disengagement from the transaction. He looked from Victoria to the binder and then turned his focus toward me. "I was told this title was clear," he said, his voice rising in alarm. "My attorneys were provided with documentation guaranteeing a clean transfer of ownership without any encumbrances." I turned my head and met his panicked stare. "You were lied to," I replied, my tone conveying undeniable authority. "This deed is a felony." There is a specific phenomenon that occurs when a localized dental infection is finally exposed to the air. The pressure built up beneath the gum line releases instantly, bringing with it a foul, toxic odor. The decay cannot be hidden anymore. It simply exists raw and undeniable in the sterile environment of the clinic. When the commercial developer took a step back and raised his hands in defense, the pressure holding my mother together ruptured. The refined Southern decorum she had spent decades cultivating evaporated in a fraction of a second. The elegant matriarch vanished, leaving behind a cornered, desperate woman who suddenly understood that her financial survival had just been incinerated. Victoria did not apologize. She did not attempt to feign ignorance or blame a clerical error. Stripped of her curated narrative and trapped in front of her high-value buyer, she chose the only defense mechanism she had left. She detonated. Her face flushed a deep, mottled crimson that clashed severely with the champagne-colored silk of her evening gown. The pristine posture she maintained in the ballroom collapsed as she leaned across the mahogany conference table. Her hands curled into tight fists. She glared at the navy blue binder, as if the paper itself were a venomous snake, and then she turned that venom entirely onto me. "You selfish, ungrateful girl," she shouted. The sheer volume of her voice was shocking inside the quiet, soundproofed lounge. It echoed off the velvet-draped walls and shattered the refined atmosphere of the country club. I did not flinch. I watched the veins stand out on her neck. A woman of her social standing is taught from childhood that raising one's voice in public is the ultimate indicator of low breeding. By screaming, she was destroying the very reputation she had committed forgery to protect. "You sit in your sterile little office making money while this family drowns," she screamed, her words dripping with a corrosive resentment. "You hoard your paychecks and play the quiet victim while I break my back keeping the Beverly name relevant in this county. That land belongs to the Beverlys. It does not belong to a spinster tooth scraper who cares more about checking accounts than her own flesh and blood." The insult was designed to inflict maximum emotional damage. She expected me to react to the word spinster. She expected me to defend my chosen profession against her derogatory labels. She wanted me to engage in a bitter screaming match so she could drag me down into the mud and muddy the waters of her own crime. But a clinician does not take it personally when a patient thrashes in the chair. I stood perfectly still. I let the silence on my end of the table act as a mirror reflecting her instability back at her. Her fury drove her to make the ultimate fatal error. In her desperation to justify her actions, she abandoned all legal caution. She admitted to the theft right there in the open room. "I took that deed because it was my birthright," she yelled, slamming her hand against the polished wood. "My father lost his mind at the end, leaving that acreage to you. I am the matriarch of this family. I am the one who curates the legacy. I had every right to correct a dying man's mistake and transfer that property into the hands of the people who actually need it." Charles moved suddenly. My father had spent the entire confrontation paralyzed by the Scotch cart, but the sound of his wife openly confessing to felony fraud in front of a corporate buyer finally spurred him into action. Charles holds a commercial real estate broker's license. He understands the strict punitive nature of the Virginia Real Estate Commission. He knew that participating in a fraudulent land transfer would not only end his career, but could easily result in his own indictment as a co-conspirator. "Victoria, please stop talking," Charles begged, his voice trembling with genuine terror. He abandoned his drink and hurried over to the table, reaching out to grab her arm. He looked frantically at the developer, trying to salvage an unsalvageable situation. "Sir, this is just a domestic dispute. We can clarify the chain of title. Please let us handle this internally." Victoria shoved his hand away with a violent jerk of her shoulder. "Do not shush me, Charles," she snapped, her eyes wild and unfocused. "We are not handling this internally. We are finalizing this sale tonight." But the sale was already dead. I shifted my gaze toward the commercial developer. He was an astute businessman who calculated risk for a living. He had come to the Loudoun County Hunt Club expecting to drink aged bourbon and sign a clean contract. Instead, he found himself locked in a room with a screeching woman confessing to forgery and a terrified broker begging for silence. The investment was no longer merely complicated, it was radioactive. The developer took another calculated step toward the heavy oak doors. His face was a mask of sheer professional horror. He wanted nothing to do with the Beverly family, their internal drama, or their fraudulent acreage. In the corner of the room, my sister Caroline began to cry. It was not a quiet, dignified weeping. It was a messy, guttural sobbing that ruined her elaborate makeup. Caroline had spent the evening dreaming of the financial rescue her mother had promised. She had imagined paying off the aggressive vendors at her equestrian breeding facility and securing her children's elite school tuitions. Watching the developer back away from the table, she realized the money was a mirage. Her entire opulent lifestyle was an illusion built on stolen property and criminal acts. "I do not know what we are going to do," Caroline wailed, sinking into one of the leather club chairs. "The credit cards are maxed out, Victoria. The caterers are threatening to sue me. You said the money was guaranteed tonight." Victoria ignored her weeping daughter. Her hyper-focus remained entirely locked on me. She stood at the edge of the conference table, chest heaving, panting for breath inside her expensive champagne gown. The physical exertion of her own rage had drained her energy. She glared at me, waiting for my rebuttal, waiting for the tears or the submission she had relied upon for 3 decades. I did not match her volume. I did not justify my career or defend my grandfather's decision. I simply let her profound instability hang in the air for the developer to witness. I allowed the echoes of her shrill insults to fade into the low hum of the air conditioning. The silence stretched tight, pulling the remaining oxygen from the room. I looked at the forged quitclaim deed resting inside the clear plastic sleeve of my navy blue binder. Then I raised my eyes and looked directly into my mother's exhausted, panicked face. I kept my voice pitched in the same soothing melodic tone I used to inform a patient that a tooth cannot be saved. "You are very thorough with your social planning, Mother," I said evenly, "but you should have checked Grandpa's addendums." The heavy oak door to the VIP lounge did not simply open. It unlatched with a loud metallic click that echoed through the sudden vacuum of my mother's silence. The polished wood swung inward, revealing the bright chandelier light of the ballroom behind it for a fraction of a second before the figure stepping over the threshold blocked the glare. Judge Richard Caldwell entered the room. He walked with a pronounced limp, relying on a thick hickory cane with a polished silver handle to steady his gait. His physical mobility had slowed over the years, but his authority remained resolute. In the hierarchical ecosystem of the Old Dominion, retired circuit court judges hold a power that transcends mere wealth. They are the architects of consequence. They remember every buried scandal, every quiet settlement, and every lie told under oath. To have Richard Caldwell enter a room uninvited is to know that an inescapable judgment has arrived. Victoria saw him, and her entire skeletal structure seemed to surrender. The forward-leaning posture she had used to intimidate me vanished. She took a rapid, staggering step backward. Her stiletto heel caught the thick, woven binding of the Persian rug. She lost her balance and collided hard with a brass side table. A decorative crystal bowl wobbled perilously near the edge, threatening to shatter onto the floor. She caught the edge of the table with both hands, her chest heaving as she stared at the man who had been her own father's closest confidant. She knew why he was there. The realization hit her central nervous system like a direct injection of epinephrine. The arrogant matriarch who had spent the evening dictating orders was suddenly reduced to a terrified trespasser caught in the act of a burglary. Richard did not shout. A man who has spent 40 years commanding silent respect from crowded courtrooms never needs to raise his voice to control a space. He stepped fully into the lounge and let the heavy door click shut behind him, sealing us back into the soundproofed environment. He planted his cane firmly on the carpet. He looked at my mother with a profound clinical disgust. It was the look you give a parasite that has caused far too much damage before finally being identified. "Victoria," he said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone carrying a cold, devastating gravity. "You have always been a remarkably foolish woman, but I never took you for a suicidal one." My mother opened her mouth, but her vocal cords refused to function. She was suffocating under the weight of her own exposure. Charles pressed his back against the brass bar cart, trying to make himself physically smaller. He recognized the judge immediately. Any commercial real estate broker in Virginia knows the name Caldwell. Charles understood that a judicial intervention of this magnitude meant his brokerage was about to face a terminal audit by the state licensing board. He lowered his head, unwilling to make eye contact with the man who was currently dismantling his family. Richard did not wait for Victoria to find her voice. He delivered the legal diagnosis with surgical precision. "I spent this afternoon at the county courthouse." He continued, keeping his tone flat and unyielding. "I have already filed a formal injunction against the sale of the Loudoun County estate. The property is officially frozen. Alongside that injunction, I submitted a sworn affidavit of forgery detailing the exact fraudulent nature of your quitclaim deed." He gestured toward the navy blue binder resting on the mahogany conference table. My grandfather had built a fortress, and Richard was merely turning the key in the lock. "William knew you lacked a moral center, Victoria. He knew you viewed his land merely as a checking account, waiting to be liquidated for your seasonal luxuries. That is why he mandated an independent secondary witness for any transfer of that property. He appointed me to serve as that witness. You failed to read the foundational covenants governing the estate. You forged your daughter's signature, and you ignored the legal architecture designed to catch you. Your document is void, your transaction is dead, and your forgery is now a matter of public record." The words hung in the sterile air of the lounge. Caroline stopped her guttural sobbing out of sheer shock. She sat frozen in the leather club chair, staring at the older man. The equestrian funding she had desperately counted on was not just delayed, it was permanently erased. The reality of her impending bankruptcy settled over her, causing her to wrap her arms around her own torso as if trying to hold her fracturing life together. Richard shifted his focus away from my family. He turned his attention to the commercial developer standing rigidly near the velvet-draped window. The developer was a shrewd corporate entity who calculated risk for a living. He had come to the Hunt Club expecting a seamless acquisition of historic pastures to convert into a profitable retail center. He had trusted the Beverly name and the glossy facade of their societal standing. Now he found himself trapped in a room with a confessed felon, a disgraced broker, and a furious retired judge. Richard looked at the man in the tailored suit and offered a final merciless warning. "Sir, I understand you represent the holding company looking to purchase these 400 acres. I advise you to listen very carefully. The title you were promised is defective. The deed facilitating this transfer is a fraudulent instrument currently under criminal investigation. If you authorize your financial department to wire a single cent to this woman tomorrow morning, you will cease to be a victim of a scam. You will be formally named as a co-conspirator in a federal wire fraud investigation. The state attorney general will freeze your corporate assets pending a lengthy inquiry." The developer did not need to hear another syllable. A successful businessman survives by recognizing when an investment has turned radioactive and cutting his losses without hesitation. He looked at Victoria with an expression of pure revulsion. He realized she had attempted to use his capital to cover her own criminal tracks while exposing his company to federal prosecution. He held the preliminary contract in his right hand. He did not bother to fold it or place it back into his briefcase. He simply opened his fingers. The preliminary contract slipped from his grasp and fluttered downward, landing face up on the woven carpet. It was a silent, powerful gesture of total disengagement. He did not say goodbye. He did not ask for clarification. He walked briskly past the mahogany table, bypassed my paralyzed mother, and reached for the heavy brass handle of the oak door. He pulled the door open and stepped out into the bright, bustling ballroom, leaving the Hunt Club entirely. The multi-million-dollar lifeline vanished into thin air, walking out the door in a tailored suit. The sound of the heavy door clicking shut behind him signaled the official termination of my mother's reign. The money was gone. The sale was dead. The legal consequences were already filed in the county courthouse. I stood near the table, maintaining my upright posture, and observed the aftermath of the extraction. Victoria was left standing near the side table, staring blankly at the discarded contract resting on the floor. The champagne-colored silk gown suddenly looked absurd, a costume for a play that had just been canceled. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths. The realization of her absolute ruin was crashing down on her in real time. She had gambled her freedom to secure her status, and she had lost both simultaneously. She had no money to pay her mounting debts. She had a felony charge waiting for her in the morning. And she had alienated the one daughter who had the capacity to handle her affairs with clinical competence. She slowly raised her head and looked at me. There was no anger left in her eyes. There was only a hollow, vacant terror. The grand matriarch of the Beverly family had been reduced to an exposed fraud, shivering in the air conditioning of a private lounge. I did not offer her a single word of comfort. When you remove a diseased tooth, you do not apologize to the cavity. You pack the wound, you ensure the bleeding stops, and you prepare the patient for the inevitable soreness that follows. The procedure in the VIP lounge was successfully completed, but the true consequence of her actions was waiting just on the other side of that oak door in the middle of the summer solstice gala. I closed the cover of my navy blue binder. I did not offer any parting condolences to the 3 shattered people sitting in the velvet chairs. When a complex surgical extraction is finished, you do not linger over the empty socket. You clean your tray and you exit the operatory. I picked up the heavy leather tote from the mahogany table. I turned my back on my mother and walked toward the exit. I grasped the brass handle and pulled the heavy oak door open. I deliberately chose not to let it click shut behind me. I left it standing wide open. I wanted the sterile air of the VIP lounge to mix directly with the humid, perfumed atmosphere of the grand ballroom. Judge Richard Caldwell walked out right beside me, his silver-handled cane tapping a steady rhythm on the hardwood floor. The commercial developer had already carved a rapid path through the crowd during his frantic escape. His hasty departure had ignited a low murmur among the elite attendees. In Loudoun County, high society's sudden, unrefined movements are considered highly suspicious. The wealthy guests had watched a prominent investor flee a private meeting looking physically ill. Now they were watching the guest of honor's daughter emerge, carrying a corporate binder flanked by a famously strict retired circuit court judge. The optics were catastrophic for the Beverly family. The string quartet was still playing a cheerful waltz, but the volume of the chatter in the room had shifted. It was no longer the relaxed hum of a summer celebration. It was the sharp, buzzing frequency of a scandal taking root. An infection in the bloodstream travels fast, but a rumor in the Old Dominion travels much faster. I know how these people operate because I watched my mother weaponize their whispers my entire childhood. Victoria built her social empire by identifying the weak points in other families and quietly exposing them over catered charity lunches. She understood that reputation is the only currency that holds genuine value in this specific zip code. A family can survive a bad investment. A dynasty can survive a quiet divorce. But you can never survive being exposed as a fraud who steals from their own blood. The guests at the Hunt Club were apex predators wearing designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos. They possessed a predatory instinct for weakness. They could smell the financial decay radiating from the open doorway of the private lounge. As Richard and I navigated the crowded floor, the Whisper Network activated with terrifying efficiency. A local district attorney caught the judge's eye and offered a questioning nod. Richard simply shook his head, performing a tight, silent gesture that conveyed profound disappointment. That single movement from a man of his stature was enough to confirm the worst suspicions of every lawyer and politician in the room. The narrative was slipping through the crowd, leaping from table to table. I kept my posture rigid and my expression serene. I did not stop to explain myself or offer dramatic testimonies to the passing patrons. I let the visual evidence do the heavy lifting. I was the quiet, professional daughter walking securely beside the embodiment of Virginia law. My mother was the woman hiding in a back room after her primary investor fled the premises in a visible panic. We reached the grand foyer near the valet stand and paused to observe the ballroom. I needed to witness the final stage of the procedure. I needed to watch the infection separate entirely from the healthy tissue. It took 10 agonizing minutes for Victoria to finally emerge from the private lounge. She could not hide in the velvet room indefinitely. Eventually, the country club management would intrude, or the caterers would arrive to clear the bar cart. She had to face the society she had spent decades trying to conquer. When she finally stepped through the oak doorway, she looked like a hollow replica of the woman who had arrived 2 hours earlier. The champagne-colored silk gown hung awkwardly on her rigid frame. Her posture was stiff and unnatural. Charles trailed a few steps behind her, staring intently at his own shoes. Caroline flanked her other side, wiping ruined mascara from her cheeks with a cocktail napkin. The reaction of the ballroom was immediate and merciless. As Victoria stepped onto the main floor, the conversations in her immediate vicinity died. The silence was not born of respect. It was the silence of containment. In clinical settings, we use physical barriers to prevent cross-contamination. The attendees at the summer solstice gala applied a social barrier. As my mother walked toward the center of the room, the guests physically stepped backward. The movement was synchronized and devastating. Wealthy equestrian breeders, legacy politicians, and charity board members smoothly pivoted their shoulders and retreated a few inches, creating a wide, empty perimeter around the Beverly family. It was a tangible, undeniable rejection. No one smiled. No one raised a glass. No one offered a comforting touch. Victoria attempted to project her usual confident warmth. She forced the corners of her mouth upward into a grotesque imitation of a smile. She made eye contact with the wife of a prominent state senator, a woman she had co-chaired a large fundraising committee with just last spring. The senator's wife did not return the smile. She looked at my mother with a blank, chilling indifference, turned her back entirely, and resumed speaking to her husband. The rejection was profound. The message was clear. Victoria was no longer recognized as a peer. She was a liability. The whispers had already circulated the essential facts. She had attempted to forge a legal deed. She had tried to steal inherited property from her own daughter to cover a mountain of hidden debt. She was financially radioactive and morally bankrupt. My mother was forced to endure the longest walk of her life. She had to cross the entire length of the grand ballroom to reach the exit. Every step she took was met with retreating bodies and averted eyes. The quiet murmurs of the crowd followed her like a dark cloud. I watched her shoulders finally collapse under the crushing weight of the social exile. The grand matriarch of Loudoun County was gone. She was shrinking into a small, terrified woman, realizing that her carefully constructed universe had just permanently locked its doors against her. Charles looked physically ill, walking silently through the gauntlet of judgment. He knew his brokerage would not survive the coming week. Caroline sobbed openly, no longer caring about the ruin of her flawless makeup. She understood that her country club membership and her children's elite status had just evaporated. She came to the party expecting to be crowned the queen of the county. She was leaving as a pariah that no respectable family would ever invite to dinner again. The social execution was swift and bloodless, leaving no room for an appeal. In a society that values polite decorum over everything else being publicly shunned, is a fate worse than poverty. It is the erasure of your identity. Richard Caldwell stood beside me in the foyer, watching the disgraced family approach the exit. He leaned heavily on his silver-handled cane and let out a long, slow breath. He noted quietly that a swift social eradication is far more painful than any jail sentence the state could impose. I agreed, but the operation was not finished. Social ruin is an abstract concept. It removes the audience and destroys the facade, but it does not address the underlying legal liabilities. The forgery was a federal crime. The notary fraud involved state licensing boards. The developer had left, but the financial devastation remained. As Victoria passed the valet stand without looking in my direction, I felt the cool night air brush against my face. The extraction was successful, and the patient had been dismissed. But tomorrow, the authorities would open their offices. The legal machinery was already humming in the background, waiting to consume whatever was left of the Beverly estate. The infection had been pulled into the light, but the resulting void still needed to be sterilized. The courts and the credentialing boards were preparing to sanitize the mess my parents had made. The sun rose over Loudoun County the morning after the gala, with a blinding, indifferent glare. Social ruin is an abstract concept. It removes the audience and destroys the facade, but it does not address the underlying legal liabilities. The forgery was a federal crime. The notary fraud involved state licensing boards. The commercial developer had fled, but the financial devastation remained. The social execution in the ballroom had been the anesthesia. Now, the surgical extraction of my family from my life officially began. The legal machinery of the Commonwealth of Virginia moves with a slow, grinding inevitability. By Monday morning, the injunction drafted by Richard Caldwell was firmly lodged in the county docket. The Loudoun County Prosecutor's Office received the heavy navy blue binder containing the forensic handwriting analysis and the sworn affidavit. An ambitious assistant prosecutor reviewed the file and recognized a perfectly packaged felony fraud case. The prosecutor did not need to conduct a lengthy investigation or interview reluctant witnesses. I had already supplied the diagnostic imaging, the pathology report, and the exact location of the decay. The first structural collapse occurred at my father's commercial real estate brokerage. State investigators from the regulatory board arrived unannounced at his Alexandria office on a Tuesday morning. They did not come for a polite meeting. They arrived with empty cardboard boxes and a mandate to seize company hard drives. Emily Vance, the junior receptionist who had stamped the fraudulent quitclaim deed, did exactly what terrified people do when facing prison time. She cooperated immediately. She surrendered her notary logbook and provided a full sworn statement detailing how Victoria Beverly had coerced her into applying the official seal without the signatory present. Emily saved herself by handing the state the final piece of evidence required to secure an indictment. Charles was holding an active broker's license while his wife orchestrated a real estate felony using his staff and his corporate holding company. The state licensing board demonstrated zero tolerance for his negligence. They initiated a comprehensive audit of his entire firm, looking into decades of past transactions. Facing a protracted public investigation that would undoubtedly uncover other creative accounting practices, my father chose the only cowardly exit available. He surrendered his broker's license voluntarily and closed the doors of his boutique firm forever. There was no retirement banquet. There were no speeches honoring his legacy. He packed his personal belongings into a cardboard box and drove away from his career in total disgrace. The criminal proceedings against my mother were clinical and brief. Victoria faced multiple charges, including uttering a forged instrument and attempted real estate fraud. Her defense attorney, a man who charged exorbitant hourly rates, quickly realized he had no defensible position. The forensic analysis was airtight. The secondary witness requirement established by my grandfather was undeniable. The defense strategy immediately pivoted from fighting the charges to mitigating the sentence. I sat in the gallery of the courtroom on the day of her plea hearing. Victoria wore a muted gray suit, devoid of her usual pearls or vibrant colors. She looked frail standing before the judge, a stark contrast to the towering matriarch who had commanded the private lounge at the Hunt Club. The prosecutor consulted with me regarding the sentencing recommendation. I informed the state that I did not wish to pursue maximum incarceration. People often assume my decision was an act of familial mercy or a lingering sense of daughterly obligation. It was neither. Sending a woman like my mother to a state penitentiary turns her into a martyr. It gives her a tragic narrative she can weaponize to garner sympathy from distant relatives. A suspended sentence with strict probationary terms is a far more effective cage. The judge accepted the plea agreement. Victoria received a suspended sentence and 5 years of supervised probation. The terms of her probation were meticulously restrictive. She was required to surrender her passport immediately, terminating her seasonal trips to Europe and her Caribbean vacations. She was stripped of her voting rights, a profound humiliation for a woman who had spent decades hosting political fundraisers and maneuvering within local government circles. She became a ghost in her own community. She was mandated to perform community service answering phones in a sterile municipal building under the watchful eye of a probation officer. The woman who had obsessed over high society status was now confined to the mundane, rigid rules of the criminal justice system. The financial ripple effect radiating from the aborted land sale struck my sister next. Caroline had built an opulent life entirely on the promise of future bailouts. When the commercial developer abandoned the purchase, her fragile economic ecosystem imploded. The elite equestrian breeding facility she ran with her husband required massive monthly capital to feed, board, and train the show horses. With the Beverly bank accounts frozen by legal fees and regulatory fines, the creditors descended rapidly. I did not intervene. I watched from a distance as the bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on her sprawling property. Caroline was forced to hold a public liquidation auction. Wealthy buyers from across the eastern seaboard arrived with horse trailers to purchase her prized animals at steep discounts. The pristine saddles, the silver trophies, and the manicured acres were sold off to satisfy her mounting debts. She was forced to withdraw her children from their exclusive private academies and enroll them in standard public schools. Caroline learned the harsh, uncompromising lesson that shared lineage does not function as an unlimited line of credit. Blood does not guarantee a bailout when the structural integrity of your life is built on a lie. In the aftermath of the legal proceedings, my phone began to receive a sporadic stream of text messages. The messages came from alternate numbers and unknown accounts, since I had already blocked their primary contacts. The texts were long, rambling paragraphs pleading for reconciliation. They suggested that the family had endured a terrible misunderstanding and requested that we all sit down with a professional mediator. They used terms like healing and moving forward. They begged for family counseling. Narcissistic personalities use the concept of therapy as a battlefield. They view counseling not as a path to accountability, but as a forum where they can manipulate a neutral third party into validating their grievances. They wanted to sit in a quiet room and convince a therapist that my refusal to be a victim was the actual source of the family trauma. They wanted to negotiate a return to the status quo where they could slowly resume extracting resources from my life. I read the messages, recognizing the desperate, transparent tactics. I did not reply. I did not explain my reasoning or offer them a sense of closure. I simply blocked each new number as it appeared on my screen. In my profession, you learn that preserving a diseased structure is an exercise in futility. When a tooth is rotten all the way down to the root, you do not attempt to counsel it. You do not negotiate with the bacteria hoping it will spontaneously heal. You apply the correct leverage and you extract it. You pull the infection out into the bright clinical light. You flush the empty socket with a sterile saline solution to ensure no trace of the decay remains behind. And then you walk away. You let the empty space fill with a clot. You endure the temporary soreness, and you allow the surrounding bone to regenerate and heal over the void. The process requires patience and an unflinching commitment to the long-term health of the patient. I had successfully extracted my parents and my sister from my life. The procedural bleeding had stopped. The pain of the surgery was fading into a distant memory. The foundation of my existence was finally clean, and the architecture my grandfather had trusted me to protect remained secure. I was ready to begin the final phase of the treatment plan. A full calendar year has passed since the heavy oak doors of the VIP lounge closed on my mother's reign. In the field of oral surgery, it takes approximately 12 months for dense bone tissue to regenerate and fill the void left by a significant extraction. The timeline for real estate and personal peace follows a remarkably similar biological schedule. I now spend my weekends driving away from the manicured suburbs of Alexandria, navigating the winding rural routes that lead deep into Loudoun County. The 400 acres of pristine pasture remain exactly as William Beverly left them. I walk the perimeter fence lines every Saturday morning, checking the sturdy oak posts my grandfather drove deep into the Virginia clay. The air out here does not carry the scent of expensive floral perfume or the anxious sweat of desperate socialites. It carries the rich scent of damp earth-crushed clover and ancient pine. It smells like endurance. It smells like survival. I did not sell the acreage to a commercial developer to pave over with concrete retail strips. I also refused to utilize the property as a bargaining chip to secure my own standing among the regional elite. The country club set assumed I would eventually conform to their expectations. They waited for me to host lavish autumn galas, to parade across the rolling lawns in designer gowns, and to leverage my grandfather's wealth to replace my mother at the top of their social hierarchy. They fundamentally misunderstood the nature of my inheritance. Status is a hollow cavity. I have zero interest in filling it with gold. The land serves a much higher function now, one rooted in genuine restoration rather than superficial display. I drafted a long-term lease agreement for the lower 70 acres of the estate. I did not offer the contract to a high-end show horse breeder, chasing blue ribbons and empty prestige. I leased the wide pastures and the renovated barns to a local therapeutic riding program dedicated to assisting children with physical and cognitive disabilities. Watching this operation function provides a profound sense of equilibrium. I stand near the wooden rails and observe certified instructors guiding gentle, patient quarter horses. The animals carry children who are learning to balance, to communicate, and to trust the world around them. The facility is devoid of arrogant trainers and frantic debt-ridden owners. The laughter echoing across the green fields is genuine. The progress is measurable and real. Caroline spent her entire adult life using horses as theatrical props to mask her crushing financial failures and project an image of supremacy. I use the same animals to help vulnerable people find their physical strength. The stark contrast between my sister's ruined enterprise and this thriving sanctuary is the only poetry I will ever need to read. On a humid Sunday afternoon in late summer, a dark sedan crunches slowly up the long gravel driveway. Judge Richard Caldwell steps out leaning heavily on his silver-handled hickory cane. He is dressed in a lightweight linen suit that breathes in the Virginia heat. He visits the estate, occasionally arriving unannounced, but always welcome. We sit together on the wrap-around wooden porch. I pour tall glasses of iced tea flavored with fresh mint grown right near the kitchen steps. Condensation beads on the outside of the glass as we watch the riding instructors work with the children in the distance. The rhythmic thud of hooves on soft dirt provides a steady, comforting metronome to our quiet conversations. Richard does not speak of Victoria Charles or Caroline. Their names are permanently excised from our vocabulary, like decayed tissue scraped from a healthy root. Instead, he speaks of my grandfather. He points toward the sturdy oak fence lines that run straight across the rolling green hills. He tells me William would be immeasurably proud of the steward I have become. He recounts stories of my grandfather's meticulous nature, his insistence on building things that could withstand the fiercest storms, and his quiet frustration with a daughter who only valued the harvest and never respected the soil. I listened to the retired jurist, the man whose required signature acted as the hidden steel reinforcement within a fragile legal document. I realized the architecture William designed performed flawlessly. The legal trap caught the predator, protected the asset, and secured the future. The fail-safe worked. During the week, I returned to my clinical practice in the city. My dental office is thriving, operating with a renewed sense of clarity and purpose. Patients recline in my surgical chair, trusting my hands to diagnose their pain and eliminate the source. I navigate the intricate nerve pathways and calcified roots with effortless precision. The stress that used to hum in the background of my life, the constant low-grade anxiety of anticipating my family's next manipulative maneuver, has vanished entirely. I no longer brace myself for sudden ambushes or retroactive tax waivers slid across country club tables. My townhouse is a sanctuary of order and calm. The air in my home feels lighter, lacking the suffocating pressure of unearned guilt. The most profound change is the auditory landscape of my existence. I no longer receive frantic text messages demanding financial contributions to fabricated emergencies. There are no desperate voicemails attempting to coerce me into attending miserable holiday dinners. The invasive noise of the Beverly family has been entirely muted. That silence is not lonely. It is the most beautiful, resonant sound I have ever experienced. It is the sound of a sterile field clean and uncompromised by outside bacteria. It is the sound of a boundary holding firm against the tide. I wake up in the morning and drink my coffee in peace, knowing that my phone will not ring with a crisis I did not create. I sleep through the night without grinding my teeth. People within my former social circles often marvel at the clinical execution of my mother's downfall. They expect a woman scorned to scream to shatter porcelain to launch a chaotic public crusade. They confuse volume with power. They assume that vengeance must be loud to be effective. The defining lesson of my 32nd year on this earth is remarkably simple. You do not have to raise your voice to destroy the individuals who attempt to break you. You do not need to match their theatrical fury or descend into their chaotic drama. You only need to analyze the radiographs, identify the exact location of the rot, and possess the steady, unwavering hands to pull it out into the bright, undeniable light.
There is a specific kind of tragedy that unfolds not in the dark, forgotten alleys of a city, but under the glittering crystal chandeliers of country clubs and behind the heavy, dead-bolted oak doors of sprawling suburban estates. In American culture, we are often sold a very specific, highly curated blueprint of success. The immaculate lawn, the generational wealth, the glowing holiday cards that project an image of absolute perfection to the rest of the neighborhood. But what happens when that perfection is merely a thin, fragile veneer? What happens when the foundation of a family is built not on love, trust, and mutual respect, but on the relentless, exhausting pursuit of social status? When we look back at the story of the forged deed, the stolen equestrian acreage, and the devastating public exposure of a mother's betrayal, we aren't just looking at a dramatic legal dispute over property lines. We are staring into a mirror that reflects a profound crisis of values in modern parenting. It is a cautionary tale about what occurs when individualism, materialism, and the desperate need for societal validation overshadow the fundamental light of human connection. From the perspective of those who seek a deeper, more awakened path in life, this story serves as a powerful awakening call to parents everywhere. It challenges us to re-examine the three core roots of our existence: morality, wisdom, and resilience. Let us first examine the pillar of morality and the dangerous illusion of wealth. In so many traditional families, there is a pervasive misconception that financial prosperity equates to successful parenting. We convince ourselves that securing the right zip code, paying for elite private academies, or passing down hundreds of acres of prime real estate is the ultimate expression of love. But when a parent is willing to commit federal fraud to literally forge their own child's signature to maintain a country club lifestyle, the truth becomes painfully clear. Money, titles, and social prestige are merely illusions. They are a house of cards waiting for a strong wind. The mother in our story believed she was the grand matriarch, the ultimate protector of the family's legacy. Yet her actions revealed a soul entirely consumed by greed and attachment to a hollow facade. The greatest legacy a parent can leave behind is never found in a trust fund, a bank account, or a quitclaim deed. It is forged in the quiet moments of honesty, in the fairness with which we treat our children, and in our capacity for genuine compassion. When we sacrifice our integrity to keep up appearances, we sever the very roots that allow a family to thrive, leaving behind a legacy of trauma rather than triumph. This brings us to the second pillar: the wisdom to see our children as independent, sovereign beings. There is a deep, pervasive blindness that sometimes infects the traditional family structure. It is the unspoken belief that because we brought a child into this world, we somehow own them. We begin to treat them as extensions of our own egos as retirement plans, or as convenient disposable tools to patch the sinking holes in our own financial ships. How often is the word family weaponized in modern culture? It transforms from a word of comfort into a heavy leash, a chain used to demand compliance to silence valid dissent, and to force a child to shrink so the parent can stand tall. True emotional awareness in parenting requires a profound paradigm shift. It is the wisdom to understand that our children come through us, but they do not belong to us. They are independent souls on their own unique journeys. Authentic love must be unconditional. It does not demand that a child sacrifice their future, their boundaries, or their sanity to cover up a parent's reckless mistakes. A wise parent knows when to step back. They recognize that forcing a child to live according to a script of the parent's making only breeds deep-seated resentment and inevitable collapse. And finally, there is the third pillar, the resilience to fix ourselves instead of manipulating others. Throughout the drama of the stolen land and the ultimate confrontation in the VIP room, we witnessed a stark contrast in human strength. Society frequently mistakes loudness for authority. The parent who screams, who cries, theatrical tears, who throws their weight around to control the narrative, they project an illusion of power. But underneath that noise is a terrifying, fragile weakness. It is the panic of an unhealed mind, terrified of being exposed to the light. On the other hand, the child who has been wronged, the one who quietly gathers the evidence, who speaks without raising her voice, who establishes an unbreakable steel boundary, demonstrates true, terrifying resilience. For parents, real strength does not lie in the ability to control a household with an iron fist or a manipulative guilt trip. True resilience is the courage to look into the dark, uncomfortable corners of your own soul. It is the willingness to confront your own fears, your own greed, and your own desperate need for validation. It is doing the grueling, unglamorous work of repairing your own character instead of forcing your children to carry the heavy weight of your unhealed trauma. The journey to a healthy family dynamic always begins from within. A home can never be a true sanctuary if the architects are actively dismantling it from the inside out of pure selfishness. We share these narratives because recognizing the rot is the first step toward clearing the soil and planting something new. If you have ever felt the heavy, unspoken weight of a family secret, or if you are navigating the difficult, lonely process of setting your own quiet boundaries against loud manipulation, you are not alone. Join our community of quiet survivors and cycle breakers by subscribing to Still Drama Stories. Drop a comment below about a time you had to choose your own peace over keeping up a family's appearances. We are here to remind you that dignity always gets the last word. In the end, the dust always settles. The grand galas conclude, the champagne glasses are cleared away by the catering staff, and the heavy courtroom doors swing shut. What remains is the profound silence of the space we have built for ourselves. For some, that silence is a tragic, haunting echo of what they lost because they could not let go of their own pride. For others, it is the beautiful breathing space of a life finally reclaimed. We spend so much of our fleeting lives trying to build a legacy that the outside world will applaud entirely, forgetting that the only audience that truly matters is the reflection staring back at us in the mirror, and the quiet, uncompromising judgment of the children who watch our every move. Look at the chair across from you at your own dinner table tonight. Is it filled with a presence born of genuine love and mutual respect? Or is it held captive by heavy obligation and fear? Or perhaps, is it simply empty? The seeds we plant today will inevitably grow into the shade we must sit in tomorrow. What kind of garden are you growing?